Following video is part of my practical TypeScript course. And if you wish to enroll in the full course, please navigate to codingaddict.io. Again, the URL is codingaddict.io, or you can utilize the link provided in the description. Okay, and up next, let's work on a small challenge. And I think it's going to be easier for me to showcase the requirements. So first, let's set up the import, but in this case, we're looking for the final folder. So all this time we have been importing from the star. This is the case where we will import from the final one. So let's go with import. Let's come up with a name. In my case, it's going to be component from. Then we're going to go in the final one, more specifically challenge, and then we'll set up 2 instances. So first we're going to go with component. We'll need to provide the type. As far as the values, notice we have 2 options. We can either go with advanced or basic. So let's start with basic. Then if we have basic, we'll also need to provide the name. In my case, I'm going to go with Susan. Let's close this component and let's set up another instance where we're going to go with component, then type. Now, if we go with advanced, now we'll need to provide more values. Not only will need to provide the name, which is going to be Anna, also we'll need to provide the email. And let's go with anna@gmail.com. And if we take a look at the browser, you'll see something like this. So this is going to be the look for the basic one. And this is going to be the look for, I believe the name was advanced. So here's the challenge. Create a component that has following features. If we provide type basic, we only look for name. However, if we provide type advanced, we also need to provide email. So for example, if I'll try to set up advanced without the email, TypeScript is going to complain. And also based on a type, notice how we have different looks. So for the basic one, we have this one. And then for the advanced one, we have a different look. Now, a tiny hint, as far as the classes in here in the CSS, you're looking for alert and alert, danger, and success. So this CSS part is totally irrelevant. Technically, you can skip it. For example, you can just add a red text or something along those lines for one of the classes. The general idea is to create a component where based on that type, we are first providing different sets of props. And if we don't, then we get the error. And also we get a different look. So try to work on this challenge. And in the upcoming videos, I'll show you my solution. Okay, and first let me show you a typical React solution prior to TypeScript. We'll also take a look at the potential issues. Essentially, we won't be able to complete the challenge. And in the following video, I'll show you a proper TypeScript solution. So first, let me comment some things out. First one, the import, and then these 2. So I still want these for your reference because they will help me to showcase the potential issues. And now let me grab the import component from, and now we're looking for the starter and same folder. So we're looking for the challenge and we want to render that component somewhere. So let's render the component. Let's take a look at the browser. So now we have React and TypeScript challenge. And initially our approach could look something like this, where we know that we need this type prop. We also know that we need name and email. And we know that based on that type, we'll display one set of classes. And if it's the opposite, then we'll display a different set. So let's navigate first to starter and then index. I guess we can right away set up the type over here or interface. That is totally up to you. I'm going to go with type, profile, card, props, 3 properties. So we start here with type. Just because I enjoy it so much, I'm just going to go with the literal type. So I'm going to say, yeah, the possible values here are basic or they're going to be advanced. Then there's going to be a name, which is a string. And also we'll set up the email, which also will be a string. Cool, cool, cool. An awesome start. Then in the component, I'll say, yeah, there's a props object, and actually it's going to have this type. So profile card props. Okay, cool. Then let's gather all of these things. So we're looking for type, name, and email, and that is equal to our props. Typescript is complaining because we're not using these elements. And you know what? Before we set up the return, let me just set up the logic for the class. So essentially, if the type is basic, I want to use the success one. And if not, I'm going to use the danger. Again, just to go back, notice in the index, we have this class for alert. So this is just going to add the padding and for radius and all that. And then based on this class, so either alert danger or alert success, we'll just have the background color and color. And yes, of course, we can set it up over here in the return, but I'll do it above, since in my opinion, it's going to be easier to see what we're doing. So alert type is going to be equal to type, then either basic or advanced. That is totally up to you. And I'm going to go with success, since that's the class name. And yes, they do need to match. And then based on this one, I'll set up my class name. So I'm going to go with const class name, and we'll set it equal to alert. So that's my main class, and then alert hyphen. And now let's access the alert type. So hopefully it's clear that if it's going to be equal to advanced, essentially not basic, then the value is going to be danger. If it's going to be equal to basic, then essentially the value will be success. And as a result, our card is going to look different. So in here, we want to go with article. And then let's add a class name. So let's access our variable over here, or constant, I guess more properly. And then let's just access both of the props. So the first heading 2 is going to be user. So we're going to go with user is equal to our name prop. Now, when it comes to email, it's going to be a little bit different, simply because we only want to display the email if the type is equal to advanced, correct? So in my case, I'll only display the email if it's provided. Now, we can set up ternary operator, or we can use the good old AND operator, and I think I'll stick with that one, because in my opinion, in this case, it doesn't really make a difference. So let's look for heading 2. Then let's set it equal to email. And now we just want to access the email prop. Okay, good. We have everything in place. Now let's navigate back and let's provide these values. And you'll notice something interesting. We will only be able to display the advanced component. Let me showcase why. So let me go here with type. We're looking for advanced. Then let's go with name. Again, doesn't really matter what we provide. So I'm going to go with Susan. And let me also provide the email over here. Let me go with Susan at susan.com. Let me save it. Everything looks correct. But notice if I'm going to go here with the basic and just omit the email, I'm not going to be successful. Why? Well, let's take a look at our type. Typescript is expecting this email one. So if I'll copy and paste over here, and if I'll say, yeah, the type is going to be basic, and actually I don't want to provide the email, Typescript is going to complain. It's going to say, hey, listen, I still need this email. And technically you can make an argument, okay, well, I could provide email over here and just provide empty string. And even though it kind of works, you have to agree that this is somewhat clunky. My goal is to have a component where if I provide this type advanced, I am looking for email. And if it's actually type basic, I'm not even looking for this prop. That's my goal. Now, you could make an argument that we can go back and make this one optional over here. And yeah, technically it works for the basic one right now. But what about the advanced one? So no, this technically is optional as well. So if I remove it, TypeScript doesn't complain. But if I navigate back, I'm not showing the email in my advanced user card. As you can see, in both of the cases, we have issues. We don't have the setup that we're looking for. And therefore, in the following video, we will cover a proper TypeScript solution. And since I know that I'm going to get this question a lot, let me just answer it here. No, adding following logic to our component is not going to solve the issue. So yes, definitely. Not only we can check for email, we can also check for type and set up the ternary operator, where if the type is equal to advanced, then we display the heading 2 with an email, and if not, we go with null. But notice our component. So for example, if I have the advanced one, yes, it nicely requires the email, and once I provide, everything is awesome. But it's going to be the same thing with our basic one. So since the prop is present, I need to provide it. And yes, I can still provide the empty string, but remember, that's not my solution. That's not what I'm looking for. I don't want to randomly provide these empty strings. And if we change this one around to optional property, same deal. Now, if I go to app DSX and remove both of these values over here, notice essentially the first card is correct, but the second one has empty email value. So yes, even though this one looks like a better solution, essentially it has the same issues as the one that we used before where we checked for the email. All right, and once we have covered the issues with our initial setup, now let's complete the challenge by constructing a proper TypeScript solution. For starters, I do want to remove these ones. So I want to start from the scratch. And essentially in here, we want to create two types. So our component actually is going to have two types. So the first one is going to be basic one, and the second one will be advanced. So we're not going to use this literal type over here. We're actually going to hard code it equal to a basic. And since there's going to be two types, I'll also name this one basic profile card props. Now let me copy this one. And in here, we want to remove the email. And it's not going to be optional anymore. So if the type is advanced, if we'll have this type, then we'll look for all of these properties. So type is going to be equal to advanced, name is string, and email is string. Now for the basic one, we'll only have type basic, and name type is going to be a string. Now where we have the component, I'll actually create another type. I'll say profile card props, and this will be a union type with basic profile card props and the advanced profile card props. And in here, we're actually gonna set up the return based on a type. So for starters, what two properties we can always access? Well, it's the type as well as the name, correct? Because keep in mind, we only have access to email if the type is equal to advanced profile card props. So therefore, we're going to look for two properties that are always going to be there. So name and type. And now, essentially, we want to set up our return where we're going to go with, well, if type is equal to basic, one of the potential values, then we'll have one set of elements. If not, well, then we'll return pretty much the other card. So let's go here with the return. We're looking for the article. So in this case, we don't need to set up that logic to add classes based on type. We want to go with class name alert success. And then inside of the article, we're just going to go with heading 2, user, and we'll access the name. So let's set it up over here. And then if the type is advanced, basically our second option, you'll see that we have access to props.email. So let's go here with return. And as a side note, you can actually structure it here as well. So in here, you can go with email, and actually TypeScript is not going to complain. And it sees that email is actually a string, simply because if the type is basic, okay, we have one return. So it knows that at this point, the email has to be present. Now, in my case, I will use the props.email. Again, it doesn't really matter which way you pick. So we want to go over here with article. Then let's add the classes. Now we just want to provide the different values. So it's not going to be success. It's actually going to be a danger one. And then inside of the article, we're going to go with heading 2. We're looking for user. Then we want to access the name, just like before. And we'll also add the heading 2 with email. And then we'll grab the props.email. So now let's navigate to app. And if everything is correct, if we type basic, we only need to provide the name and we'll get the correct look. However, if we go with advanced, we'll need to provide both of those values. So if we go with component type, notice we have basic or advanced. So those are our two options. If we go with basic, we only need to provide the name. So notice now we have property name is missing. Okay, good. Provided. And notice how we don't need to provide an email here with an empty value. No, TypeScript is happy. Everything's fine. We have correctly a basic user card. Now, if we're going to go here with component type and we'll set up the advanced, now it's looking for name and email. So one by one, let's set it up. We have name. Again, let's go with our Anna and email. And let's just provide the value. Yep, looks about right. Hopefully everyone enjoyed the challenge and we can move on to the next topic. All right, and up next, let's see how we can use TypeScript with Context API. Before we begin, please keep in mind that we will write a bunch of the boilerplate code, meaning don't get overwhelmed by the amount of code, since you'll be able to take it from project to project. And second, at this point in time, Context API is not as popular anymore. So if you don't find these examples useful, don't stress about it. In fact, if you don't use the Context API at all in your apps, feel free to skip the following videos. For Context API, I did prepare 2 examples, the very basic one with just one state value and a more complex one with more bells and whistles, just so we can cover all the topics step by step. So let's start just like with the previous examples where we want to import from the starter. In this case, we're looking for the context one. And in this case, we'll create 2 files. So one is going to be for context. And essentially in the index one, we'll access the context. Now, if you work with Context API before, you know that technically we can wrap the app component in context. We can also set it up in the main DSX. So there's tons of options, but in this case, I just decided to set up everything in the context, just so it's easier. Add it to the final one and leave it for your reference. So don't be surprised if in this example, we'll have 2 files. So for starters, we're looking for component. So this is coming from, we're going to final, and then we want to look for context. Again, let's render it somewhere here on the screen. The component one, and let's navigate to our 06 context one. Let's create a new one, and the name is going to be context DSX. In here, we need 2 imports, and you know what? Actually, I'll set up the third one as well, since we'll use it in the following example. So we're looking for 2 functions, create context one, and also use context, since we'll set up the hook as well. And then lastly, in the following example, we'll use the use state. So I'll add that import here as well right away. And for now, let's just create a new context. Now, as far as the naming, you'll notice that I keep using this theme. And it's simply because the following example is going to be for the theme. And I pretty much want to use the same names. So we'll just build on this example. That way we don't need to type too much. So theme provider, and let's call this context. Let's invoke create context. Now this is going to be generic, and the difference between normal React and React with TypeScript is that we'll have to provide the default value. So in this case, I'm just going to go with undefined. Let's imagine that we don't know what the context is going to be. Then we want to set up a component, which is actually going to wrap all of our components and provide the context. So we're going to go here with theme provider. And if you're familiar with the context API, you know that this component normally is looking for children. So it's looking for the component since it's a context provider. So in here, we'll definitely need children. And we know already that as far as the type, we can either use the type provided by React, or we can just go with React and then dot and React node somewhere here. Now, as far as the logic, here's where we want to go with return. And we'll just set up one value. So we're looking for theme provider context. It has the provider component. So we go here with the provider, and then we want to wrap the children. So we'll go here with the children. And notice how TypeScript is complaining because we do need to provide the value. Now, once we provide a value, you'll notice that TypeScript is not going to be happy with create context setup. So for now, let me just showcase the basic example. Let's say I provide over here the hello. And the moment we do that, notice we right away get the red squiggly line. And the error message says, well, you cannot assign string to undefined. So this was okay initially when we were creating the context. We could say, all right, so it's going to be undefined. But now TypeScript is complaining. And in order to fix it, create context is a generic. And in here, we'll use the type union. First, we'll provide what is the eventual value, which will be a string here. And we'll also go here and say that it can be undefined. So this will be our initial value. And then this will be our eventual value. So eventually, we'll have this value equal to string. And that's why we have over here this type. I'm purposely keeping still this undefined because it's going to be super useful once we set up our custom hook. So even before we wrap any of our components, I also want to set up a hook called use theme. Again, I'm just going to keep these names since we will use them in our following example as well. And in here, we want to invoke use context, which is looking for the theme provider context, essentially any context. So let's set up this one. Context is equal to use context, and we're going to go with theme provider context. And now if the context is undefined, I actually want to throw the error. Now, when the context is going to be undefined, because at the moment we can clearly see that actually we do have a string. Well, this context could be undefined if, let's say, we're trying to access this use theme, but the component where we're using the hook is not wrapped in the theme provider context. And in my opinion, it's a good setup because that way we immediately can see that there is an error. And you'll see what I'm talking about in a second if this is confusing. So I'm going to go here with context. And if it's actually equal to define, I'm going to throw the error. And if everything is correct, then we'll return the context. So say here, return context. But before that, we'll go with throw new and error. And let's just provide some kind of error message. In my case, I'm going to go with use theme must be used within the theme provider. Let me save it over here. And now let's navigate to our index one. Let's import both things, the hook as well as the theme provider. And now let's set up the parent component. So we're not going to export this one as default. actually there's going to be a parent component where we'll have our theme provider. So first, let's start here with use theme. Okay, yeah, that's coming from the context. And I also want to grab the theme provider. And then let's set up the parent component. Again, this is just to demonstrate how we can wrap components. Please keep in mind that typically you'll do that in the app or in the main TSX. So we go here with parent component. That's our function, basically our component. And as far as default one, I actually want to export the parent component, not the component. And then in here, let's go with theme provider. And then inside of it, we want to place the component, essentially this one. And once we nicely wrap the component, we can actually go over here and I can go with context, go with use theme. So that's my hook. This is how I can access the values. And basically, if we log over here and provide the context, if everything is correct, we should see that value hello in the console. So now let's navigate to the browser and this looks interesting. So it looks like I'm grabbing the file from the final one. So let me navigate back. Yeah, we're not looking for final, my bad. So we're looking for the star in this case. And once we do that, notice the value is hello. And essentially it matches whatever we pass over here in the value prop. Now, of course, normally this is going to be more complex. For example, you could have here an object and name is going to be equal to something. Let's go with hello. Same deal. Now I'll just need to go back over here where we create the context and just provide that eventual value. So again, this is undefined. This is the default one. And in here I can say that, yeah, there's going to be an object and the property is actually going to be string. So notice now if we navigate to the console, we'll see this value instead. And the reason why this line of code is so useful is because if we navigate back and, for example, we forget to wrap everything in our theme provider. Basically, let's say that we are trying to access our theme context without wrapping the theme provider. And I'm just going to simulate that by returning a component. Notice how immediately I'm going to have the error in the console. And not only that, it's going to be super helpful where it's going to say, hey, use theme must be used within the theme provider. So this is going to give me a super good clue what is wrong with my current code. And of course, now I just need to go back and wrap everything nicely in the theme provider. So let me remove this one. And now again, we're good to go. The main deal over here, when we use Typescript, we will need to provide what is the eventual type for our value prop over here. And we can simply say that, yeah, initially it's going to be undefined. And then eventually, whatever we set up in the value, we'll need to provide the type over here. And since the theme provider is always going to be looking for children, it's always going to be looking for components. Therefore, we'll need to provide a type for a children prop as well. All right, and now let's work on more complex example. Please keep in mind that this code is going to be available in the README, just in case you ever want to reference. And also in the final one, you'll find this basic context and basic index TSX. And essentially, this is the code that we set up in the previous video, because in my case, I will modify my existing code right now. So for starters, I'm going to go here with type and theme, and I'm going to go with literal types. So we'll provide light. We'll also provide dark, and we're going to go with system. And essentially, we're building here a theme context provider. So let's say in our application, we want to toggle between the light and a dark theme, and we want to do it globally. Therefore, we're going to set up the context provider. Now, let me navigate to theme provider. And essentially, I'll set up over here a use state. So I'm going to go with use state. And we know that it's a generic, and I'll say, yeah, the value is going to be string, but actually it's going to be type of theme. And eventually we will provide the default value. Let's not worry about it right now. And let's just go with theme. And as I note, I do need to provide the square brackets. And we're looking for a theme and also a set theme. So we have these values over here. And as far as what I want to pass down, instead of this name, hello, I'll actually go with theme and also a set theme. So now, of course, Typescript is going to complain because this doesn't match whatever I have here in the create context. So let's fix that. Let's set up a type for our state, which actually matches whatever I have in the value. So we're going to go here with type theme provider, and let's say state props or state. That's total up to you. I'm going to go with theme, and that is equal to a theme over here. So theme type, and also a set theme. And essentially, we'll just say that it's a function which is looking for a theme, and type will be equal to a theme, and it doesn't return anything. So we simply provide void over here. And instead of hard coding the object with the name property, which is a type string, we're going to go with theme provider state. Now, in this case, it's complaining because it says, well, theme can also be undefined. And we have multiple ways how we can fix that. Either we can provide the value like so. So I can just say, yeah, the default value is going to be dark, light, or whatever. Or in my scenario, I'm actually going to add one more property in the props. And therefore, I will set up a separate type. So I'm going to go with type, theme, provider, and let's call this props. And we'll look for two things. First one is going to be children. So this one is the same. So React dot, and we're looking for React node. And also, I want to set up the default theme. So let me add over here a property, default theme. I will set it optional, and I'll actually set it equal to type theme. So it's going to be optional, but it needs to match one of these values. So light, dark, or system one. And where I have the theme provider, I'll actually remove the hard-coded one and add theme provider props. And in here, let's go with default theme. And I will add some default value, which is actually going to be a system. And now at the very end, I'll go over here and provide default theme. And pretty much this concludes our theme setup. So as you can see, once we understand how we can set up a basic context with just one value, it's pretty easy to set up a more complex one. So now we just want to navigate to index.tsx, and we want to change our component around. So this one will stay the same. And of course, if you want to test it out, you can provide over here the default value and all that. That's definitely an option. But in my case, I just want to grab the context with a theme. And I also want to set up a button, which I'll use to change the theme. So in here, right after this React and TypeScript, so I guess I'm going to leave that. I want to set up a button. And remember now in our context, we have multiple things. Not only we have theme system, but we also have this set theme function. So I want to try to invoke the set theme on a button click just so I can see whether my functionality works. So let's add over here a value. I guess I'm going to go with toggle theme. And then also let's add the on click. So we're going to go over here with on click. Let's provide the arrow function. And I'm just going to check what is the value. If the value is equal to dark, then I'll set it back to system. And if it's actually a system one, then I'm going to go with theme dark. So let's go here with context dot, and we're looking for theme. Then we want to check the value. Notice how we right away get our nice suggestions. I'm going to say if it's equal to dark, then I want to set it to system. So context, then set theme, and we provide the system one. Then we return like so. Now, if it's already a system one, then we just want to go with context, set theme, and we provide over here the value of dark. And you know what? I also want to add some classes here. So let's go with btn and btn center. Let's save it. Now I have my button, and pretty much every time I'll click on it, I'll change this value. Now we haven't set up any CSS, so nothing is going to change as far as the background. But notice as I'm clicking, I'm actually changing the value in the state. So that's how we can set up context API with TypeScript. Okay, and up next, let's see how we can use TypeScript with use reducer hook. And just like context, yes, it's not as popular anymore since we have options like Redux Toolkit and ZooStand, but you still might encounter it from time to time. And therefore, I decided to add it to the course. Just like before, we want to start in app DSX. Hopefully this time I'm importing from the correct folder. So let me go with star, and now I want to go to reducers. Okay, let's save it. Let's see. Okay, at the moment I have React and TypeScript reducers. Looks about right. And this is the case where I do suggest navigating to a README, and basically we want to get some star code because I really don't think that it's going to be beneficial to type this together. So essentially go to 07 reducers and you're looking for this function. So this is what you want to set up in your component, not the app DSX. Make sure you navigate to the star 07 and we're looking for the index one. This is what you want to paste it over here. And essentially this is what you'll see in the browser. So we'll have increment, decrement, and reset. So at the moment, nothing is happening. We just have some console logs over here. And also we have this set status to active and inactive. So basically our state is going to consist of two things. So there's going to be some counter value, and also we'll change the string value of active and inactive, just to showcase how it works. And our goal essentially is to set up the use reducer hook and also set up the reducer, initial state, and all that cool stuff. So now let's navigate back to the component. We want to go with const, and this is returning two things, state and also a dispatch, and we set it equal to use reducer. So we import that, and it's going to look for counter reducer, so some kind of reducer function, and also initial state. So first, let me just provide these values. Please don't import them from the final one. We'll just go here with counter reducer and initial state. So I'll set up both of these values. Now, of course, we don't have them in this file. This is why we want to go to the folder and we want to create a new one. So in this case, I'm going to call this reducer TS. Again, if we have a component file, yes, we go with TSX, but if it's just going to be a JavaScript file, then we just go with TS. So let's set up reducer TS, and let's start with the initial state. So this is something we're going to export. We're going to go with initial state. In a second, we'll set up the type. For now, let's just go with count, which is equal to a 0, and then status, the initial value, will be pending. But this is where we'll change it to active and inactive. So now let's set up the type for this one. So export type counter state. And in here, we have two values. We have count, which is type number. And also we have a status, which is equal to a string. So now we just want to go here where we have the initial state and set up our type. So counter state. Okay, awesome. So we're exporting that. I guess we can now go over here with import. And we're looking for our initial state. And this is coming from the same folder. So we just look for reducer. So now we just need to set up the counter reducer. And for now, it's simply going to be a function. And if you know with a reducer, so it's looking for the state as well as the action. So what is the state and what are we going to do with that state? And for now, we're just going to return that state. So we're going to go here with export, then const counter reducer. So that will be the same name. And we'll set it equal to our function, our arrow function. As far as the parameters, this is what we're looking for. The state, which is actually equal to a counter state and action. And for now, let's just set it equal to any. Of course, as we're working on a functionality, we're going to fix that. And as far as what we want to return from the function, we're going to go with counter state. And then inside, we're going to go with a return and state. So pretty much for now, we're just going to grab the state and we'll return state as it is. So then back in the index DSX, not only we have initial state, but we also have the counter reducer. So in the upcoming videos, we can start working on the functionality. And once we have the setup in place, I guess let's start by displaying the value from the state. So at the moment, we're hard coding the count as well as the status, but keep in mind that in here, we already have some initial values. So let's just access those. Count is going to be equal to the state that we're getting back. And notice how we have these two properties. And in this case, I'm looking for the count. And the same is going to be for the active one. Instead of active, actually, it's going to be equal to a state and then the status. Let's save it. Notice now we have count. And also we have the pending one since that's my default value. And I think I'm going to start with these ones. So we want to set up a few types, one for increment, decrement, as well as the reset one. And we're going to start by setting up a type. And I'm going to call this update count action. So that will be my type over here. So let's set it up. So type update count action. And in here, I'm going to go with the literal one. So either it's going to be increment, decrement, or reset. So type increment, then union. We also can have decrement, and also we can reset the value over here. And now I'm going to create another type since there will be one for the status one. But technically, I mean, if I would only have the count over here. So if I wouldn't have functionality to change the status, I can simply go with update count action and set it equal to my action. So that will be my type. But since there's going to be more logic, I'm going to go with type and then counter action. And that one will be for now equal to update count action. So now where we have the action in the counter reducer, we want to go with counter action. And now let's set up our logic where inside of the counter reducer, instead of returning the state, we're going to go with the switch statement. And we want to go with action and type. Notice again, we have these potential three values, and then based on the actual value, we'll do some logic over here. So first, let's set up the default one. And let's say that by default, we'll just return a state. We'll say state over here. And then as far as the cases, let's go with increment first. So that's going to be our first case. And then we want to go with return. And we want to pretty much spread out the current state. So we only want to update, and then count is going to be equal to state dot and count plus 1. And pretty much we want to do the same thing for the rest of them. So the second one will be decrement, case, decrement. As you can see, we only have two options at the moment. So decrement, and we just want to change this around where instead of +1, we're going to go with -1. And then lastly, we also have the reset. So case, reset. And if that's the case, we just want to grab this state and basically set the count equal to 0. Now, in order to invoke, we need to use the dispatch, and we need to pass in the correct type. So instead of just logging it over here, we want to go with dispatch, and then we need to provide what is going to be the type. And as far as the increment one, it's over here. And we want to repeat for decrement the same, dispatch, type, and then decrement. And then at the very end, we also have the reset one. So as you can see, the biggest difference is that now we have a clear control over the action type. So usually this was the biggest pain points where you could provide some random value. Once we use the TypeScript, it's actually not the case anymore. We clearly have a list of values that we can provide, and we're not going to provide anything random. So notice now I navigate over here to the browser and I have these 3 working buttons. Okay, and let's also see how we can handle the action where we have the payload. So with our counter, pretty much we're only handling the type, correct? And then based on that, we control the state value. But we can also pass in the payload. And for starters, let's set up a type for that. So we're going to go with set status, and let's call this action as well. In here, there's also going to be a type. So this property we definitely need to provide. And as far as the value, I'm going to go with set status. And then when it comes to payload, I'm just going to go with few options. And again, I'm going to use my literal type. So I'm going to go with active. And also it's going to be equal to inactive. Then we want to navigate to our reducer. And let's set up the case where we're going to go with set and status. And as a note, before we do that, actually we need to add this set status action to our counter action, to our counter action type, because this is how we're checking actually in the reducer. So let's go with set status action. And now notice how we're going to get some nice suggestions. So if I go over here with case and then set status, now we just need to decide what are we going to do. And in my case, I'm going to return the state, so that doesn't change. And as a note, there is a error over here. And now we just need to update the, I believe what was the value, the status one, correct? So in the state, there is a status one. And we're just going to set it equal to action and payload. So we'll set it equal to one of these strings over here. So now we want to navigate to index DSX, and where we have the console logs to active and inactive. Same deal. We just want to dispatch it. Type going to be equal to, and we want to go with set status. And then we will need to provide the payload as well. So in here, let's go with payload, and this will be equal to active one, I guess. That's going to be the first button. And now we want to copy and paste and just change these values around. So instead of active, we're going to go with inactive. Yep. If I provide the correct value, everything's awesome. So now let's just navigate to the browser, and not only we can control the counter, but we can also change these values. So we can also pass the payload. And at the very end, let's also not forget about the type never. So let me navigate back to the reducer. And we can see over here that by default, we return the state, which technically is okay, but just keep in mind, we can add some kind of type over here, and this is going to fail silently. So for example, if I'm going to add another type over here, I'm going to go with something random. If I'm going to dispatch it, I mean, it's going to go through my cases, and essentially I'll just get back the state. So the problem with this one is that it's very hard to catch this error. And therefore, in here where we have the default, actually we want to add some logic where I'm going to go with const on handled action type. Remember, type is never, and we're going to set it equal to an action. And now notice how immediately it complains, because effectively there is another type. The moment actually it's a random one over here. And unless we handle it, so unless I go over here, case, and then random, and then decide what I want to do, for example, return, and then ... state. Unless I do that, there will be a error. And what's really cool that it's actually at build time, so not at runtime. So now let me remove this example over here, and let's just complete by throwing a error. So let me go with throw new error, and let's provide some error message. And once we have this one in place, now we can remove it. And not only will be able to catch the error, but also if for some reason we add a type and we dispatch it, there's going to be a super helpful error in the console which right away will lead back to the counter reducer.